Hey everyone, Forrest here with Rocky Mountain School of Photography, and today I want to take a look at why, as a photographer, you might want to use neutral density filters. So neutral density filters are just as they sound. The word neutral means that these filters do not introduce any sort of color cast into your image when you use them, and density means that they darken things. So it's basically a neutral darkening filter. That's the way to think about it. But generally as photographers, we're trying to capture as much light as possible. Why would we want to darken things? Now the answer is a little bit different with video than it is with photo, and I actually already made a video on why a videographer might want to use neutral density filters. I'll leave a link to that down in the description. But for photographers, the main goal is to slow down your shutter speed in order to show motion. Now let me break down what I mean by that. A lot of you have probably seen those images of running water. Say it's a beautiful waterfall and the water is cascading down the rocks and you want to show that pillowy, nice, soft water. The way you get those images is by slowing down your shutter speed, sometimes to 10, 15, even 30 seconds in duration. The problem is, if you think about the exposure triangle, when you set your shutter speed to 15 or 10 or 5 seconds, you're gonna have to vastly reduce your ISO and stop down your aperture in order to eliminate enough light to let yourself use those longer shutter speeds. And in many situations, especially say in the middle of the day, you're not gonna be able to do that. There's gonna be, say, a lower limit on how slow of a shutter speed you can use. Let me give you a quick example. Let's say I'm shooting in Glacier National Park, it's the middle of the day and I'm shooting a waterfall. Well, I know I wanna use a slow shutter speed, but I don't know how slow I can go. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna set my other two settings in my exposure triangle for the greatest, slowest shutter speed I can get. I'm gonna put my lens at f16, f22, or f32, whatever my most stopped down aperture is. I'm gonna set my ISO as low as it will go to 160 or 100 or 200. And then I'm gonna take a meter reading and I'm gonna see what shutter speed my camera says is proper. So I'm gonna point out into the scene on manual mode and I'm gonna spin my shutter speed dial until my little needle is pointing in the middle. And a lot of times in the middle of the day, you might be at a 30th of a second or a 60th of a second shutter speed, even at your most stopped down aperture and your lowest ISO. And that produces a problem because at a 30th or a 60th of a second, you're not going to show that motion in the water that you're after. And this is where an ND filter comes in. All you gotta do is take this little ND filter. This happens to be a variable ND, which means that it goes from 2 stops to 5 stops of darkening. I would take this filter, thread it onto the front of my lens, and then I would again center out the little needle on my meter. And because the meter is reading the light through the filter, it's gonna take into account the darkening that the filter is applying. Well, if you put a 5-stop neutral density filter on a camera and you were at a 30th of a second, it's gonna cut out 5 stops of light. So let's do this together. 30th to a 15th is 1 stop, to an 1/8 is 2 stops, to a 1/4 is 3 stops, to a half is 4 stops, to a full second is 5 stops. So we would go from a 30th of a second to 1 second shutter speed by putting on a 5-stop neutral density filter. And the motion blur you're gonna get at 1 full second compared to 1/30th of a second is a huge difference. That's gonna allow you to capture that pillowy, beautiful water that you're after. Now, neutral density filters come in a lot of different densities. They come in a lot of different darknesses. You can get a 10-stop ND, you can get a 16-stop ND, you can get a 2-stop ND. I like these variable neutral density filters. They're a little bit more expensive, but they give us the ability, again, to tune between 2 stops of darkening and 5 stops of darkening. And I'll leave a link to this specific filter down in the description. So y'all, that's really what they do. They're there to let you use a slower shutter speed. Rarely can I think of another instance. There are some special use cases, say if you were doing time lapses or other long exposure situations that you might want one of these. But generally that's the goal. The goal is to take the amount of light that's coming in the lens and darken it down so that we can use a slower shutter speed without overexposing our picture. Now there is one other very important caveat I need to say. You need to think about neutral density filters as going hand in hand with a tripod. Tripods are super key whenever you use a slow shutter speed because you want to ensure that something in your photograph is sharp. So I would assume that whenever I'm bringing out the ND filter and I'm going to do some slow shutter speed photography, I'm also going to get out my tripod so that I can ensure that my images are crisp. Some other little bonus settings would be turning on something like self-timer or using a cable release to eliminate the amount of shake you're inducing into the camera when you push the shutter button, as well as if you have a DSLR camera, using something like mirror lockup to reduce the mirror shake every time that shutter is pushed. So overall, I hope that gives you a good overview on why you would want to use neutral density filters in your photography. Again, if you're a videographer, it's a whole nother reason. We still use it for shutter speed control, but we use it to allow us to use a specific shutter speed for video. And maybe I'll make a specific video on not action camera NDs, but video like cinematography NDs. If that's something that interests you, let me know down in the comments. Everybody, I hope you found that video helpful. If you did, drop a like on it. I would really appreciate it. If you have a question, leave it in the comments section down below. And lastly, hit subscribe to stay up to date with future videos. Thank you all, and I'll see you in the next one.